quote from the nuclear generating companies, okay? And so anybody that generates electricity, Nwmo is tasked with finding a long-term solution for the used fuel. And so a lot of people are confused. They think that it's liquid, but it's not. These are just plastic replicas, but it's a hard ceramic pellet. Okay, that's what the fuels consists of. It's loaded into these zircaloy alloy tubes, and these tubes are all fastened together to create a fuel bundle. And this is the standard fuel in a Canada nuclear reactor. That's what operates in Canada presently. So right now we have about 3 million of these fuel bundles that are stored in warehouses, and we figure we'll have about 5.2 million by the time we get to the end of the licensed lifetime of the nuclear generating stations currently. We'll have about 5.2 million bundles, like I said. Canadian terms, that would fill about 8 hockey rinks to the top of the boards. But it's a very dense energy. 9 of these little pellets would produce enough electricity for the average Canadian home for a year. And one of these fuel bundles actually will power 100 homes for a year, one fuel bundle. Okay, so lots of energy. All the energy you would use in your lifetime would fill a pop can full of those pellets. That's all the energy you'd ever use in your life. Over here, Scott, we talk about radiation. A lot of people figure we live in an absence of radiation. No radiation is good and this is terrible. But actually we live in radiation. When we step outside in the sunshine, we're in radiation. If you eat a banana, they have radiation in it. But those are levels, safe levels that we've evolved into. When these come out of a reactor, they're hot and they're very radioactive. They're very predictive though. They won't catch fire, they won't explode. They're just radioactive and you have to shield yourself from it. So when they come out of the generator, the reactor, they go into cooling pools for 7 to 10 years. And water makes an excellent shielding. So it cools down in there. When the water gets too warm, it's filtered, it's circulated out and cooled, and then it goes back in again. So we use the same water over and over again. This guy's not wearing any special equipment because that water creates an excellent shield for him. He is able to be on that platform, but he's not affected by the radiation because the water creates that shielding. When it comes out of the pools, it goes into these long-term storage containers. They're made out of concrete and steel. The lids are welded on, and they sit in big warehouses. You can see it's very clean in there. We take people on tours sometime of those facilities so that they can see what it's like where it's stored now. 90% of it is in Ontario, in Canada. And I guess an important part is, so we can't accept used fuel from other countries, and other countries can't send their fuel here. If you create it, you're responsible for it. 90% in Ontario, because we have 3 generating stations in Ontario, so the most of it's here. There's a bit in Quebec, and there's a small plant running in New Brunswick as well, so 5% of the used fuel there. The fuel cycle of nuclear, so the uranium is mined in Saskatchewan, it's trucked to Blank River for processing. When it's shipped, it's only in 45-gallon drums. It's slightly radioactive, but not very radioactive at that point. Then it goes on to Port Hope, Peterborough, and Toronto, where it's made into these pellets, and it's loaded into these fuel bundles, and then it goes to the generating stations. There, it's in there from anywhere from 12 to 18 months, and producing electricity, and they're changed out when necessary. After that, they go into long-term storage, as we've already discussed. And then the next stage is where our company, Nuclear Waste Management Organization, takes over. So we would be responsible for moving the used fuel from those sites to wherever the repository is going to be, and then we would process it and place it underground. Here we talk about partnering with communities. Nipigon was a partner for a while, and we feel that no community should be out of pocket to learn about the process, so we provide agreements, funding through agreements with the communities, so that they're not out of pocket, or they're not having to raise their taxes to learn about this. So the process was that we wanted a willing host communities. So we asked communities across Canada, would they be willing to learn about this and eventually maybe consider hosting it. 22 communities volunteered in that process, from Saskatchewan to Ontario. Nipigon was one of those communities, and Nipigon was the only one that used their option to withdraw from the process. They learned for a while, they felt it wasn't a fit for them, so they said, we're going to withdraw from it. The rest of them were all mostly withdrawn because the rock quality of the rock wasn't sufficient in their area. The exception was in the Hornpain area and Manitowoc area. They had good quality rock, but then it comes back to developing partnerships with communities. If you got good rock everywhere, you have to use other parameters to decide. And so the organization felt where they had the strongest support and the best likelihood of a partnership. So that's why that area north of Superior was screened out. So we're down to Ignace now and South Bruce are the two remaining communities. So our whole process is called the adaptive phase management process, and the reason, a couple of key reasons why we have to be adaptable is we started looking for a site in 2010. We're not looking at operations until 2043. So if we took technology from 2010 and we went with that all the way through, it would be kind of foolish if we don't accept what's new coming down the pipe. So we have to be able to adapt when new things come online and include them in our project. The other key part of adaptation was we wanted to have a final site selected by the beginning of 2023, but then this pandemic came along and we haven't been able to get out and talk to people for over a year. So now we moved that date back to the end of 2023, so we've adapted there. The next step after that would be to go into about 5 to 10 years of environmental assessment work. We have to convince our regulators that our plan is safe, and we have to convince the communities that our plan is safe as well. So that will be an extended process. Here we talk about the well-being in Canada's plan. So working with the local communities and the First Nation and Métis as well. And a lot of people, they go straight to this part first. How many jobs? How much money can we make? Is it good paying money? But we've got to do a lot of work on the environmental part of it first to prove that we have a safe plan. And then if you're going to have a community like Ignace with 700 or 800 new jobs, where's everybody going to live? Is there sewer and water to support it? Are there schools and hospitals? So we've got to look at the whole picture and make sure that, because it's a 150-year project. It's not like boom and bust like a mine where you have, it could come and go in a 20-year cycle. So here's a bit of information about the different stages of the project of the 150 years. We're in site selection now, 15 years. And the numbers in black are the predicted jobs in each phase, and the numbers in blue below them are the spin-off jobs. So the supply chain that it would take to support a project like this. The fuel that's stored up until this section here in the 70 years of extended monitoring, we could extract that fuel because there is still energy in it, where our present technology doesn't allow us to extract all of the energy. We could go back in and we could repurpose those, but we don't have technology currently that can do that. So if new technology comes along, that's an option. But and the other thing is, for this whole project, it's a $23 billion project. That's with a B. And there's no new bill or tax coming from this. As soon as they started generating electricity in this fashion, they started banking money away for the eventual cost of a long-term storage facility. So that's in the works. This is an artist rendition of what our head office might look like. So within a couple of years of finding our final siting location, We will be building a head office. We'll be closing our Toronto office, and all the jobs will be moving to wherever we choose to locate. So that means the jobs will be coming as well to that location. This is a 3D model here of what we're proposing. So down below is 500 meters underground, approximately. And that represents a series of tunnels with placement rooms that run off of, they're just smaller tunnels. That's where the used fuel would be stored. It would be serviced by 3 elevator shafts. And that area underground is 2 kilometers by 3 kilometers. And the reason we spread it out all on one level is because we want the 500 meters of rock to stay as strong as possible. It might be 70,000 years from now, but they expect that another glacier will go over, and we want enough sufficient rock there to support the weight of a glacier scraping over the surface of the earth. So on the surface, it's a lot smaller. This area would be about 600 meters square. We would have a building here that would, the main building would contain a hot cell, and because that material is radioactive, it would have to be remotely, robotically unloaded from the transportation package and repackaged into the permanent storage package. That would all happen in a closed nature, in a sealed unit, and then the containers would be prepared and ready to go underground for placement. Over here we talk about the importance of the intertwining indigenous knowledge with Western science. And early on in 2005, we knew how important it was going to be to work with First Nation and Métis communities. So we started a council of elders and youth, and those individuals come from across Canada. They don't speak on behalf of the local First Nation and Métis people, but what they did was they educated us on how to engage respectfully with the communities, so that we would do that in a respectful manner. They've also helped us create a reconciliation statement and a reconciliation policy. So we work on events and activities with Indigenous communities to show that we recognize the wrongdoings of the government and churches in the past, and that we just in recognition of the wrongdoings, and that they were a mistake, and that we should acknowledge that. Okay, so here we talk about 5 barriers of protection. So we have to store this stuff forever, virtually, and we don't have a million years to do a pilot project or a test project. So we take examples of Mother Nature that shows us materials that we should use in this process. So the first is the pellet itself. It's made into a dense ceramic pellet, so that's ceramic is the same as ceramic pottery. In Wabigoon a couple of weeks ago, a gentleman shared with us a piece of pottery that he found down by the lake. We took a picture of it. We had an archaeologist date it by looking at it. He said it was over 2,000 years old. It's been exposed to the environment, summer, winter, spring, fall, for 2,000 years plus, and it's still intact, it's still solid. So our goal is to keep that pellet a solid, at depth, away from moving water, and then it can never be reintroduced to the surface, and it'll never affect us or the environment. So the pellet itself, we know that if it was exposed to water, it could withstand being dissolved. It would last for tens of thousands of years. Okay. The pellet is loaded into these zircaloy alloy fuel bundles. That's what goes into the reactor, and it comes out of the reactor as well. It's a very corrosion-resistant material, so that would also protect the pellet from being introduced into water, because it would last many thousands of years as well. Next, these fuel bundles are loaded. This is just a model size, but they're loaded into carbon steel containers, and they're very strong, kind of the same design as a propane tank, but they're steel, and they could corrode over years, and we're talking many tens of thousands of years. So what we're looking at is coating it with 3 millimeters, of copper. And the reason we know that is when we found nuggets of copper that's buried in earth that's not exposed to the environment, to the oxidization, copper won't rust. So we want to utilize the copper, 3 millimeters, to protect the steel. If the steel never corrodes, then it will stay intact for the length of time we're looking for. It's put into what we call a buffer box made out of bentonite clay. And up here you'll see these buffer boxes are loaded into a placement room, like a tunnel, and then it's all backfilled with loose bentonite clay. And the reason we do deal with bentonite clay, this is a core of bentonite clay drilled into a formation. But in Italy, there was a place where there was no known trees, and there was a construction site, and they were digging in this clay, and they found massive tree stumps there. And they weren't petrified, and they weren't rotten. They were fresh. But nobody remembered there ever being trees there, so they carbonated the stumps, and they were over 1 million years old. That clay had preserved those tree stumps for that length of time and kept it sealed up. So we feel that that can be a very valuable component in our process as well. So we talk about no moving water. These are cores. So this is what we'd be drilling at our events in Southern Ontario. We have limestone, so sedimentary rock. The one on the left is a granite core. That would be from the north up here. Okay, that's what we're drilling in. And it's hard to imagine that there's water in that core, but there are microscopic droplets of water, and when dated, they will be millions of years old. And those droplets can move, but it may take 1 million years for it to move a foot or 16 inches. So we're testing that on our core to see how old that water is dated at. And so this host rock around this placement room could have small droplets of water in it. And because we create an opening there, over many tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years, these water droplets may have worked their way into that placement room. So the clay would be the first barrier. It would swell up and seal off to prevent water from permeating through. Then if it did manage to work its way through after hundreds of thousands of years, then it's going to meet the copper coating container. So, and it works its way backwards to continue to protect that pellet and keep it a solid, and so that it can't be transferred to the surface. So over here, this is an actual cutoff of the life size. So that model copper over the copper container, this is what the actual container looks like, but it's 2.3 meters long in its full length. So this will hold, it'll contain 48 of those fuel bundles. They would fit in there. The container is all coated in the copper. You can see a little bit of surface rust on the steel, and that's what the copper will prevent. There's no rust over here because it protects the steel. The cap that fits on there is, the joint is a lap joint, and it's welded on. So it's all covered in copper except that strip where the welding takes place. After the welding is completed and tested, then they can complete the copper coating, and then it's ready to go underground. So our operations are going to be for 40 years. The fuel is safely stored in an intermediate fashion in those warehouses. It's going to have to be moved to site. So transportation, we're looking at either train or truck as options. And if we were to use truck, this would be the model of the container that we use for that, that's been tested. It holds 192 fuel bundles. It weighs 30 tons empty and 35 tons loaded. We don't need any special highways or bridges to transport it, because it would be the equivalent of a log truck or a superload wood chips, a similar weight. It's about 6 feet square. It's a solid block of stainless steel. There's no welds on it. It's all machined out. The walls on the actual unit are 11 inches thick. The lid is a similar thickness. There's a double seal gasket here. 32 bolts hold the lid on, and that's one of the life-size bolts. Give you an idea of just how robust it is. This unit is called an impact limiter, and this would be bolted on over top of the unit. And in the unlikely event that it broke free on the trailer during an accident, this is like a shock absorber. So if it tumbled, it would just reduce the stress on the container. We expect that it would be 2 truck shipments every day for 40 years. So it's quite likely that one of these trucks could be involved in an accident, but the unit itself is very safe, and we want to take all kinds of safeguards. We've listened to critics of our plant, and we're considering things like maybe we should have enough fuel stored on site for a couple of weeks, and if we have a 3-day blizzard, we shut our trucks down. We don't haul in that kind of weather, and we can resume hauling after the storm's over, the roads are cleared. Maybe we shouldn't be hauling at night. Maybe we should have pilot vehicles coming ahead. So we're listening to the public, and with their safety concerns, that could help build our safety record. I'll play a short video for you here to just show you some of the extensive testing that a unit like that would go through.
Tests include dropping the containers onto a hard surface, subjecting them to an intense, fully engulfing fire, and submerging them underwater. Well beyond the scope of these regulatory requirements, over the years, nuclear waste transportation containers have been subjected to a number of extreme demonstration trials. For example, an independent test in 1984 by the Central Electricity Generating Board in the United Kingdom showed that a cask designed to meet International Atomic Energy Agency requirements could successfully withstand the forces of being rammed by a locomotive traveling at 160 kilometers per hour. As you can see, after being hit, the cask remains intact with only superficial scarring. In 1999, the German Federal Institute for Materials Research and Testing examined the impact of an explosion next to a used fuel transportation cask. A propane-filled rail tank car in close proximity to a used fuel cask was set on fire. The exploding rail car directly hit and overturned the cask, which embedded itself into the ground about 10 meters away. As in all other tests, the transportation cask survived intact and prevented any release of its contents. These extreme demonstrations clearly show the robustness of packages which have been designed to move used nuclear fuel safely, without releasing radiation under even the most severe plausible conditions.
And we close off by just talking about the 8 other countries that we have agreements with, that Nwmo is formally working with. And so the best of our scientists in Canada are working with the best of the scientists in these countries. So they compare notes. As a matter of fact, about a month ago, we had a gentleman from Finland here in the Ignace area working with our staff. And Finland is well ahead of us in this process. They started building their repository last year, and they expect to have it fully operational in the mid-2020s. So yeah, so that we're comparing our notes with other countries, and they're working with us as well to share ideas. That pretty much concludes the tour. Do you have any questions?
No, thanks. Thank you very much, Uncle Kevin. That's a wrap.